Ever wonder how honey gets from hive to jar?
The 2024 beekeeping season began with a flurry of activity in the bee yard. I kicked off the spring season with hive inspections, where I start by removing moisture boards, inspecting the health of the colonies, and preparing for the upcoming nectar flow. I also add honey supers at this point if they're needed. It was at this moment I was caught off guard when my strongest hive began to swarm. Luckily, I quickly spotted the queen, enabling me to guide the swarm into an empty hive box that my friend Hazel had left from last year. Hazel was thrilled as her patience paid off with a productive new colony of bees. By evening, we had successfully resettled the swarm and sent them home with Hazel. She reported the next morning that the bees had settled in smoothly. Honeybee swarming is a key reproductive method for these colonies. When a hive becomes overcrowded or conditions are just right, the colony instinctively divides into separate groups. One group, led by the original queen, departs in a swarm. This usually happens in the spring or early summer when there's plenty of nectar and pollen available. In my apiary, I try to make an effort to capture these swarms and transfer them into one of my empty hives. While I generally succeed, I have lost a few swarms along the way. Occasionally, feral swarms have discovered my vacant hives and settled in, which is exactly how this particular colony was established. When a swarm first leaves, it typically clusters nearby, often on a tree, while scout bees search for an ideal spot to start a new hive. Once they find a suitable location, the swarm then relocates, beginning the establishment of their new home. I always aim to capture the queen because her pheromones are crucial in keeping the swarm together. And a few weeks later, this robust hive swarmed again, but their high perch posed a challenge. I initially tried to entice them into the hive with frames of drawn comb, but they kept returning to the tree.
All right, so I repositioned everything and I put the sheet underneath the hive. I tried to get it from what I think where it could fall, and I'm just going to give it a shake and see what happens. Most likely I'll miss and they'll fly right back up, but fingers crossed.
Eventually, I had to resort to shaking them into the box, a risky maneuver. Most of the bees landed in the hive, but a significant number ended up on me and the sheet I had placed underneath. Fortunately, I managed to locate the queen amidst the commotion and secured her with a clip. Finding the queen early on was a stroke of luck. Her pheromones were vital in guiding the swarms into the hive box. Once I was sure they were moving in, I released her, and the remaining bees followed. By dusk, I was able to transfer them to their new spot in the apiary.
Honey harvest is always an exciting day. Gets my adrenaline pumping. And I think those boxes are full. I'm harvesting a little earlier than usual so that I don't have 300 pounds at once like I did last year. It's a perfect day. It is not super hot or humid. It's always hot in this getup, but for now, I use pine needles in my smoker. They're plentiful here. We have a whole row of pines, and so that's what works well for me. But we want a cool smoke. We don't want it to be super hot. So I just make sure that it's flowing up through there. Give it plenty of oxygen. It's going. The more I can pack in here, the longer it'll last. I don't have to keep adding to it. So probably a little bit too much there.
The spring had been delightful, but with a hot summer on the horizon, I decided to harvest a bit earlier than usual. I chose this option over adding additional honey supers. After last year's substantial harvest of 300 pounds, I knew I didn't want to tackle such a large volume all at once due to the considerable workload. Opting for 200 pounds this year felt much more manageable, though it still proved to be time-consuming amidst the busy gardening season. Now, every beekeeper has their own way of harvesting, and I have changed my methods many times over the years. But lately, I found it easier to remove the honey supers right at the start. This lets me gauge how full they are. I simply set it aside and place a fresh, empty honey super with clean drawn comb on top. Then I go through each frame of honey to see what we have. It's important that the honey be capped. That ensures that it's safe to process.
So this frame is not completely capped. It actually looks like about half of it still needs capped. And that side's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put this frame back into empty, and that way they can finish ripening that honey so that it's ready, and they'll still have some to work with in case we have some bad days.
After the bees initially fill the honeycomb cells with nectar and allow it to evaporate to the right moisture level, they seal the cells with a thin layer of beeswax. This capping serves as a protective barrier that keeps the honey from absorbing moisture and becoming fermented. Harvesting honey before it's properly capped can lead to high moisture content, risking spoilage and fermentation. By waiting until the honey is fully capped, it's ensuring that it's reached the ideal consistency and is preserved in its purest, most stable form. When a frame is ready for harvest, I first shake off the bees over that empty super that I just placed, then brush off any remaining bees and transfer the clean frame to a covered box in my wagon. If a frame has excessive uncapped honey, I return it to the hive for the bees to process further. Sometimes this process goes smoothly without incident, particularly when there's a strong nectar flow and the bees are preoccupied with foraging. However, today was a little different. The scent of fresh honey attracted some robbing attempts from local wild colonies, so I had to work swiftly.
See, all the honey is capped. Lots of drone. See the drones right there. They're larger with very big eyes. I'm just making sure there's no queen on this frame.
The honeybee life cycle is a fascinating process that begins with the queen laying eggs in individual cells of the hive. These eggs hatch into larvae, which are meticulously fed by worker bees. As the larvae mature, they pupate within their cells, eventually emerging as adult bees. The hive is made up of different roles: the queen, who continues laying eggs, female workers who handle foraging, hive maintenance, and brood care, and the male drones, whose primary function is to mate with the queen. Over the course of their lives, worker bees can gather about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey each. Seemingly small, but when multiplied by the entire colony, this effort results in an impressive honey store. A strong hive can collect up to 60 pounds of honey in a season, enough to sustain the colony through the winter and provide a surplus for beekeepers. As I was nearing the end of the process, I observed a flurry of bees and feared one of my hives was under attack by robbers. Such moments are always nerve-wracking and make me second-guess my decisions. However, in tune with this season's activity, a small swarm arrived in the area. I managed to locate and capture the queen and transfer the swarm into one of my empty hive bodies. I'm still uncertain of the swarm's origin. It didn't appear to be from one of my hives, so it's possible it was a chance occurrence. Maybe a wild swarm was scouting nearby and was drawn to the activity. Extracting honey is a meticulous process that begins by removing a frame for uncapping. I start by using a hive tool to separate the propolis seal between each frame. Propolis is a sticky, resinous substance collected by bees from tree buds. They use it to seal gaps in the hive and protect it from intruders. It's also thought to be antibacterial. Its purpose is to maintain hive hygiene and regulate temperature by filling cracks and smoothing surfaces. This frame here exemplifies a nearly perfect honeycomb. The wax comb is evenly drawn out. It has a light color and a clean, fresh appearance. Because the comb is slightly thicker than the frame, it's easy to remove with the uncapping knife. Such frames are ideal as they make the uncapping process swift and efficient. Any remaining bits of wax are quickly handled with the uncapping tool. In contrast, this frame is a bit thinner, making it more challenging to uncap completely with a knife. And as a result, I need to use the uncapping tool more extensively, which is very time-consuming. Once the frames have been uncapped, I place them into the extractor. The extractor is typically a cylindrical drum-like device with metal or plastic frames mounted inside. The extractor uses centrifugal force to spin the frames at high speed. This spinning motion is powered either by a hand crank or an electric motor, depending on the model. As the frames spin, the centrifugal force pushes the honey out of the cells of the comb and onto the inner walls of the extractor drum. And to ensure all honey is extracted, the frames may need to be rotated or reversed depending on the extractor's design. The honey then flows down the sides of the drum and collects at the bottom where it can be drained through a spigot or a valve. I use a food-grade 5-gallon bucket to capture the honey. It's fitted with a filter to catch bits of wax. The filter's mesh has openings that are 400 microns wide, which is large enough to catch the wax, but small enough to let pollen grains, which are typically 10 to 100 microns in size, remain in the honey. This ensures that the honey is cleaned from debris while preserving its natural pollen content. After extracting the honey, I place the frames back into an empty honey super. These supers will be returned to the hives later for the bees to clean up. I typically allow the honey to settle for a few hours to overnight before bottling. This settling period helps bubbles rise to the top, resulting in a clear bottled product. This year, I'm simplifying by using just a few containers. I only have plastic bottles that hold 1 pound of honey and glass quart jars that hold 3 pounds. Honey's denser than water, so 1 pound of honey occupies less volume than 1 pound of water. Most of my customers prefer the convenience of plastic bottles. Now, glass is a superior choice in my opinion because it's infinitely recyclable and better for preserving the honey quality. Glass jars are particularly useful when honey crystallizes, an inevitable process where glucose in honey forms crystals over time. This crystallization occurs because pure honey naturally contains a mix of sugars, and when stored at cooler temperatures, the glucose tends to crystallize while the fructose remains liquid. Now, we use honey gates on food-grade buckets to make the bottling process go smoother. Conveniently, my drawer handles are perfectly positioned to rest the bottles on while filling them. And since I do this in my kitchen, I take great care to prevent spills and clean them up quickly if they occur. This is both to maintain cleanliness in my kitchen and product quality. I also keep a clean, wet cloth handy for any sticky mishaps. Bottling is actually a pretty meditative process for me, much like beekeeping in general. And this year, I ventured into selling honey in bulk for the first time. While it brings in less money per pound compared to bottled honey, it's a significant time and effort saver, which is greatly appreciated as I get older. I hope this becomes a more regular option in the future. In recent years, some friends have requested honeycomb, so I assembled 10 frames specifically for this purpose. Wax foundation made for spinning has wires running through it to help hold the frame together during extraction. These unwired frames make it possible to hand-cut squares that I place in plastic clamshells or with honey in a jar, whatever the customer wants. I usually place these special frames on the hives only during the spring nectar flow, as the season produces lighter colored wax and honey. The frames are clearly labeled for easy identification. Occasionally, if the honeycomb turns out a bit uneven or oddly shaped, I share it as a gift with friends or often my students. After extracting the honey supers, I return them to the hives for the bees to clean up. They meticulously gather every speck, making equipment storage easier, either outside under cover or possibly left on for autumn nectar flow, which is right around the corner. The sweet aroma attracted some attempted robbing, but my strong hives swiftly defended their territory. I closed their upper entrances for the day just to be safe and monitored the situation closely. At sunset, I checked the apiary, pleased to find everything in good order. Far away from the hives, I place all the wax cappings out for the bees to clean. I can process them either way, but I just prefer the bees to have it rather than wasting it. Now, I only do this when the threat of robbing is extremely low. For example, I did this last year on a nice day in December. Often, I'll do it in the middle of a summertime high nectar flow as well. You might be surprised to know that wax is full of a lot of stuff. Rendering is essential to remove any remaining honey, pollen, pupal casings, plant material, and other impurities from the wax, making it suitable for various uses. There are several ways to do this, and I typically use a large pot with boiling water as a double boiler to melt the wax. Then I filter it through a commercial grease filter and stand. Once the wax is clean, I pour it into molds. The wax typically cools and is ready to be removed from the molds within an hour. I have a whole video on this if you're interested in all the details. I'll link it here. Now, I often share this wax with friends, but I like to use them for a variety of products that I make. Recently, I used it to make lip balm and calendula salve. The lip balm and salve combines the therapeutic benefits of calendula and chamomile with the nourishing properties of beeswax, shea butter, cocoa butter, and various oils, and I'll be sure to link those videos here as well. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please let me know in the comments and feel free to ask any questions you might have. Thanks for watching.